earned all the way from $12 to $25. But Fanny knew she had driven home the entering wedge. She left them after making an engagement for the following day. The Horn and Udell factory was in New York's newer loft building section, around Madison, Fifth Avenue, and the 30s. Her hotel was very near. She walked up Fifth Avenue a little way, and as she walked she wondered why she did not feel more elated. Her day's work had exceeded her expectations. It was a brilliant January afternoon, with a snap in the air that was almost Western. Fifth Avenue flowed up, flowed down, and Fanny fought the impulse to stare after every second or third woman she passed. They were so invariably well dressed. There was none of the occasional shabbiness or dowdiness of Michigan Avenue. Every woman seemed to have emerged fresh from the hands of masseuse and maid. Their hair was coiffed to suit the angle of the hat, and the hat had been chosen to enhance the contour of the head, and the head was carried with regard for the dark furs that encircled the throat. They were amazingly well shod. Their white gloves were white, a fact remarkable to any soot-haunted Chicagoan. Their coloring rivaled the rose leaf, and nobody's nose was red. "Goodness knows I've never pretended to be a beauty," Fanny said that evening, in conversation with Ella Monahan. "But I've always thought I had my good points. By the time I'd reached 42nd Street I wouldn't have given 2 cents for my chances of winning a caveman on a desert island." She made up her mind that she would go back to the hotel, get a thick coat, and ride outside one of those fascinating Fifth Avenue buses. It struck her as an ideal way to see this amazing street. She was back at her hotel in 10 minutes. Ella had not yet come in. Their rooms were on the 10th floor. Fanny got her coat, peered at her own reflection in the mirror, sighed, shook her head, and was off down the hall toward the elevators. The great hall window looked toward Fifth Avenue, but between it and the avenue rose a yellow brick building that housed tier on tier of manufacturing lofts. Cloaks, suits, blouses, petticoats, hats, dresses. It was just such a building as Fanny had come from when she had left the offices of Horn and Udell. It might be their very building, for all she knew. She looked straight into its windows as she stood waiting for the lift, and window after window showed women sewing. They were sewing at machines, and at handwork, but not as women are accustomed to sew, with leisurely stitches, stopping to pat a seam here, to run a calculating eye along a hem or ruffle. It was dreadful, mechanical motion, that sewing, a machine-like, relentless motion, with no waste in it, no pause. Fanny's mind leaped back to Winnebago, with its pleasant porches on which leisurely women sat stitching peacefully at a fine seam. What was it she had said to Udell? "Can't you speed up the workroom? It's worth it." Fanny turned abruptly from the window as the door of the bronze and mirrored lift opened for her. She walked over to Fifth Avenue again and up to 45th Street. Then she scrambled up the spiral stairs of a Washington Square bus. The air was crisp, clear, intoxicating. To her Chicago eyes the buildings, the streets, the very sky looked startlingly fresh and new-washed. As the bus lurched down Fifth Avenue she leaned over the railing to stare, fascinated, at the colorful, shifting, brilliant panorama of the most amazing street in the world. Block after block, as far as the eye could see, the gorgeous procession moved up, moved down, and the great, gleaming motor cars crept, and crawled, and writhed in and out, like nothing so much as swollen angleworms in a fishing can, Fanny thought. Her eye was caught by one limousine that stood out, even in that crush of magnificence. It was all black, as though scorning to attract the eye with vulgar color, and it was lined with white. Fanny thought it looked very much like Siegel and Cohen's hearse back in Winnebago. In it sat a woman, all furs and orchids and complexion. She was holding up to the window a little dog with a wrinkled and weary face, like that of an old, old man. He was sticking his little evil, eager red tongue out at the world. And he wore a very smart and woolly white sweater, of the imported kind, with a monogram done in black. The traffic policeman put up his hand. The bus rumbled on down the street. Names that had always been remotely mythical to her now met her eye and became realities. Maillard's. And that great red stone castle was the Waldorf. Almost historic, and it looked newer than the smoke-grimed Blackstone. And straight ahead, why, that must be the Flatiron Building. It loomed up like the giant prow of an unimaginable ship. Brentano's, the Holland House, Madison Square. Why, there never was anything so terrifying and beautiful and palpitating and exquisite as this Fifth Avenue in the late winter afternoon, with the sky ahead a rosy mist, and the golden lights just beginning to spangle the gray. At Madison Square she decided to walk. She negotiated the bus steps with surprising skill for a novice, and scurried along the perilous crossing to the opposite side. She entered Madison Square. But why hadn't O. Henry emphasized its beauty instead of its squalor? It lay, a purple pool of shadow, surrounded by the great, gleaming, many-windowed office buildings, like an amethyst sunk in a circle of diamonds. It's a fairyland, Fanny told herself. Who'd have thought a city could be so beautiful? And then at her elbow a voice said, "Oh, lady, for the love of God!" She turned with a jerk, and looked up into the unshaven face of a great, blue-eyed giant who pulled off his cap and stood twisting it in his swollen blue fingers. "Lady, I'm cold. I'm hungry. I've been sitting here hours." Fanny clutched her bag a little fearfully. She looked at his huge frame. "Why don't you work?" "Work!" He laughed. "There ain't any. Look at this." He turned up his foot, and you saw the bare sole, blackened and horrible, and fringed comically by the tattered leather upper. "Oh, my dear!" said Fanny, and at that the man began to cry, weakly, sickeningly, like a little boy. "Don't do that! Don't! Here!" She was emptying her purse, and something inside her was saying, "You fool! He's only a professional beggar." And then the man wiped his face with his cap, and swallowed hard, and said, "I don't want all you got. I ain't holding you up. Just give me that. I've been sitting here on that bench, looking at that sign across the street. Over there. It says, 'Eat.' It goes off and on, seeming like it was driving me crazy." Fanny thrust a crumpled $5 bill into his hand, and was off. She fairly flew along, so that it was not until she had reached 33rd Street that she said aloud, as was her way when moved, "I don't care. Don't blame me. It was that miserable little beast of a dog in the white sweater that did it." It was almost 7 when she reached her room. A maid in neat black and white was just coming out with an armful of towels. "I just brought you a couple of extra towels. We were short this morning," she said. The room was warm and quiet and bright. In her bathroom, that glistened with blue and white tiling, were those redundant towels. Fanny stood in the doorway and counted them whimsically. 4 great fuzzy bath towels. 8 glistening hand towels. A blue and white bath rug hung at the side of the tub. Her telephone rang. It was Ella. "Where in the world have you been, child? I was worried about you. I thought you were lost in the streets of New York." "I took a bus ride," Fanny explained. "See anything of New York?" "I saw all of it," replied Fanny. Ella laughed at that, but Fanny's face was serious. "How did you make out at Horn & Udell's? Never mind, I'm coming in for a minute. Can I?" "Please do. I need you." A moment later Ella bounced in, fresh as to blouse, pink as to cheeks, her whole appearance a testimony to the revivifying effects of a warm bath, a brief nap, clean clothes. "Dear child, you look tired. I'm not going to stay. You get dressed and I'll meet you for dinner. Or do you want yours up here?" "Oh, no." "Phone me when you're dressed. But tell me, isn't it a wonder, this town? I'll never forget my first trip here. I spent one whole evening standing in front of the mirror, trying to make those little spit curls the women were wearing then. I'd seen 'em on Fifth Avenue, and it seemed I'd die if I couldn't have 'em too. And I dabbed on rouge and touched up my eyebrows. I don't know. It's a kind of crazy feeling gets you. The minute I got on the train for Chicago I washed my face and took my hair down and did it plain again." "Why, that's the way I felt," laughed Fanny. "I didn't care anything about infants' wear, or Haynes Cooper, or anything. I just wanted to be beautiful, as they all were. Sure, it gets us all." Fanny twisted her hair into the relentless knob women assumed preparatory to bathing. "It seems to me you have to come from Winnebago or thereabouts to get New York. Really get it, I mean." "That's so," agreed Ella. "There's a man on the New York Star who writes a column every day that everybody reads. If he isn't a small town man, then we're both wrong." Fanny, bath bound, turned to stare at Ella. "A column about what?" "Oh, everything. New York, mostly. Says it's the humanest stuff. He says the kind of thing we'd all say, if we knew how. Reading him is like getting a letter from home. I'll bet he went to a country school and wore his mittens sewed to a piece of tape that ran through his coat sleeves." "You're right," said Fanny. "He did. That man's from Winnebago, Wisconsin." "No!" "Yes." "Do you mean you know him? Honestly? What's he like?" But Fanny had vanished. "I'm a tired business woman," she called back, above the splashing that followed, "and I won't converse until I'm fed." "But how about Horn & Udell?" demanded Ella, her mouth against the crack. "Practically mine," boasted Fanny.